Okay, everybody, this is the third video lecture on the topic of young adulthood. And we've been talking quite a bit about stress. And I did want to clarify one thing. In the previous lecture, I suggested that there was a scale in this chapter module about coping. And I am correct. It's the hardiness scale. And it asks you to score yourself on 3 aspects of hardiness, and this is actually what you will get points for or lose points for. Those aspects are commitment to self, so those are like your commitments to your own personal values, right? The sense that life is a challenge versus like life is hard kind of thing. And the third one is your sense of control. So that speaks to this a concept of locus of control. And people who score higher on an internal locus of control, so they basically feel like they can control what happens to them and life's not just coming at them, they that's a measure of hardiness or resilience. So the more resilient people, the hardier folks have a sense of personal control, a sense of their personal values, and they score higher on life as a challenge as opposed to like life. So it's the idea that life is a challenge to be overcome instead of life is a drag that you just got to plod yourself through. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. All right, so in the remainder of this video lecture is going to talk about cognitive development. Remember, cognitive is thinking. So what's really happening here, and our brains are developing from the back to the front. So back here, you've got your motor skills and you've got your emotional center. And so this frontal part, this is where your executive functioning is your last to develop. And so consequently, we're moving into young adulthood. Our ability to think is becoming increasingly more sophisticated, more nuanced, more abstract, right? So we're shifting from, from a dualist, which is the idea of right and wrong. That's a very simple way of thinking about the world, that the world is black or white, to a more relativistic or a more subjective or a more gray. And so this is what we call post-formal. So formal thinking, formal thinking is yes, no, right, wrong. We put people in very clearly delineated sort of thinking. A relativistic, right? It's all relative. This is more abstract, and it requires the ability to see gray, to see to combine. So what your textbook says, right? Post-formal combines logic, emotion, intuition, draws on your experiences, and you begin to sort of see gray, and things are not so cut and dried. And these things begin to happen in your young adulthood. And then as you age, what we see is that in fact you become increasingly better at this. We become increasingly better at incorporating lots of different perspectives into our understanding. When we get to like middle age and late adulthood, we move to something called crystallized intelligence. And crystallized intelligence is the idea to think about all of our different experiences. And so one of the things that I've observed, and I'm getting a little off track, but one of the things that I've observed in my life is the older I get, the less certain I am, because things become more relative. Right. So we begin to shift. So you're coming out of your teenage years and this is how the world is. And then you start to family form and you kind of start to think, oh, I might have been wrong about some of that. Dialectic thinking. Oh, I love this word. Dialectic thinking is the idea that we start to appreciate the argument. And I don't mean argument as in like you like to argue or you like to debate, but dialectic implies two, right? So the dialectic thinking is that you can appreciate a position or an idea from different perspectives, and you appreciate the structure of the argument or the counter argument. A great a thing I remember about my father is he would begin a conversation. He loved to discuss. And I get frustrated when folks say I like a good debate, because I don't like the idea of a debate. It implies a winner and a loser, but I love a good discussion, a discussion where you can talk about a position and I can talk about a position. But what my father used to do is he would start these discussions and he'd be like, he'd be supporting this side of the argument of the point of view, and he would switch sides, right? And not really tell people he was switching sides. He was a dialectic thinker, and he could switch sides sort of in the middle of a conversation. And these things begin to happen. So one argument actually for one argument opposed to these dual credits that we start to see where we're teaching more and more courses at the high school is that our brains are not yet developed enough to have those abstract, those kinds of gray arguments that sometimes we're supposed to have, especially in like the humanities. I mean, it makes sense probably for math, but when we're asking 15 and 16-year-old people to have conversations about alternate perspectives, they may simply not have the cognitive capacity to do that. Okay, so that's the dialectic thinking. This is a neat slide also about how our ability or how we use intellect. Now, I want to stress that intellect is our ability to think, right? Intellect is not knowledge, but it's our ability to think. And so when we talk about intelligent people, or when we talk about IQ, what we're really talking about are people's ability to think. Now, that's not what they know, because you can know a lot of facts, but not know how to use those facts. So what this slide is it's a stage model of how we use our ability to think over our life course, right? So as a child, we're using our skills, our ability to think, and we're using it for self-amusement, right? How to use a toy. That's what we call accuse, that one right there. Achieving, so this would be in this stage of the life course in our early 20s, we're using our ability to think and to achieve a goal, right? So we're applying our knowledge to a career path, and we're using the knowledge we gained in high school to advance our career. Also, it's kind of in middle age, I mean, in early adulthood, but this is spilling over into middle age. We use our ability to think to solve our personal problems, to take care of our families, right? We're organizing timelines, we're making lists, we're strategizing how to get our kid into the best schools, or how to get ourselves into a particular professional position. The next stage is what we call your executive. We're beginning to take a larger, so what happens in middle age is as our children launch, as our children leave, we don't have to use our intellect anymore to parent. You know, I mean, for those of you who have children, and I've read in some of your posts that things like, well, it was a bit more challenging to parent my son, right? Sometimes our kids can really demand that we think creatively. How do we raise our children? How do we get them to do what we want them to do? Or how do we get them to understand something, right? You're using your intellect. You're using your ability to think and to problem solve to get your kid to act the way you want them to act, right? Or to understand things. Well, once your kids are gone, right, you have all these skills that at helping people think. Now what do you do with it? And so the idea is that in this stage 4, this executive, now I can shift those skills, that intellectual resources I was using to take care of my kids, and I can use that maybe in a political arena, or maybe I can use that to draw attention to world problems, but you know, once you were using those skills maybe towards bettering your career, then you were using them to take care of your children. Now you can direct them towards, maybe you get involved in community politics or something, right? And then the last couple, right, when this reorganization, these happen later in life, and we'll talk more about those later on. But basically, we become a little bit more self-centered, I think, how we use our intellect. So the reorganization and the reiterative ones, and that's when we become a bit more selective about how we use our cognitive resources, and we may spend our intellect our intellectual energy on a hobby, or we may do this last stage is what we call legacy creating. So we might spend it writing a memoir or in articulating things that have happened over our life for the next generation. But the point is, what I really want to emphasize is that in this stage of life, you're probably going to be using these number 2 and number 3, right? Our intellect is going to, our ability to think and problem solve is going to be focused on our job, our own personal advancement, or our families, right? And we're going to, the ability to think abstractly, to put together our life experiences, everything we know, right? Think about, maybe, I know some of you may be grandparents, right? But think about the strategies that you have, the things that you know about the kids and the world as a grandparent that you didn't know when your kids were small, right? And I have said it, and I suspect some of you may have said it or thought it too, is if I knew, so an example is we had, my niece was my foster daughter for a while. She was the first teenage girl I ever parented. If I had parented my biological daughter before I parented my foster daughter, I would have been a much better parent, because I made assumptions or things I didn't understand about teenage girls that I didn't handle very well. So my guess is if you've had a couple kids, or maybe if you're grandparenting, you maybe have had those instances too. If I only knew then what I know now. And I'm going to stop right there.